Recognizing Cowichan Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to be speaking in support of this bill today, the Labour Relations Code Amendment Act. In my remarks, I will discuss some of the core elements of the bill and why I think they are important to support, but I also want to speak more about the broader reality facing people today, and I don't think that gets nearly enough attention that it deserves in these kinds of conversations. The reality is the increasing precarity of jobs and the erosion of income security for many British Columbians. The reality facing workers today, especially young people just starting out in the labour force, is extremely different from the reality that faced their parents and grandparents when they were starting out. Young people today face a much less secure working life and have to contend with significant financial hurdles that have real impacts on their sense of security and well-being. Many are saddled with high levels of debt right out of graduation from university or college, and they're facing housing prices, particularly in our major cities, that have far outstripped local incomes. I'm glad to be part of the Green Caucus and to have supported this minority government in the steps that they have taken to deal with some of these issues. For example, reining in the runaway housing market, cracking down on hidden ownership, and the influx of foreign money and illicit cash that has been distorting housing prices in BC. Eliminating interest on provincial student loans is also an excellent step. And taking steps to create universal early childhood education, which will make a huge difference to young families. These changes matter, and they will make a real difference in the lives of people across BC. But while we must continue to build on these initial steps, we also urgently need to have a conversation as legislators about what the economy looks like today and what it means for the health and well-being of British Columbians into the future. We need to stop simply talking about economic growth and job creation and start talking about what types of jobs are actually being created, the quality of jobs, their impact on the quality of life of British Columbians and their families, and how the economy is serving the needs of British Columbians and also how it isn't. Before going further, I'd like to make some remarks on the specifics of the bill before us today. This piece of legislation makes a number of important revisions to the Labour Code. The changes before us today are moderate, but they also will make significant differences to improving fairness and balance in workplaces and make a tangible impact on the lives of workers in BC. I believe that one of the most important changes is the extension of successorship protections to workers in a number of sectors who are impacted by contract flipping. We debated some of these issues in the fall when we repealed Bills 29 and 94, better protecting healthcare workers from contract flipping. The bill before us today extends successorship protections for workers in a number of sectors, particularly affected by contract flipping, including the janitorial services, security, bus transportation, food services, and non-clinical health sector services. The wording perhaps sounds dry and technical, but the existence of successorship protections under the code, or the lack thereof, can have a profound effect on people's lives. When contract flipping occurs, often the same workers continue to do the same work at the same location with the same equipment. However, because the contract has flipped, these workers lose the benefits of their collective agreement. They have to reapply for the jobs that they already had and often face significant deterioration in wages, benefits, and working conditions. There have been many stories that make this reality crystal clear. I want to cite the review panel here who said, quote, "We heard examples of workers with 20 to 30 years of experience having their wages and benefits significantly reduced by contract retendering. One care aide related that although she had been employed under a collective agreement for many years, when the contract for services was retendered, she had to reapply for employment. She was then rehired by the new contractor with a 50% reduction in wages, and only her service with the new contractor was considered for seniority purposes." Honourable Speaker, I don't think we want to live in a society that treats people this way. And if we can all imagine the circumstances of suddenly earning half of what we earned the day before or the week before for the same job that we are doing, that is a devastating impact on people's lives. It is also important to note that this is a racialized and gendered issue, with minority women bearing the brunt of these impacts. This change will have a profound impact on the well-being of many people. It will remedy an injustice that has been allowed to carry on for too long and that has accelerated over the last 20 years since it started to arise as an issue in the 1990s. The issue that has received the most attention in this legislation by far is the question of how certification occurs. In this instance, my caucus colleagues and I have decided to stand behind the review panel's recommendations, which maintains the secret balance while strengthening the code to better protect workers from interference during the voting period. It wasn't a simple decision. We heard many calls from workers and organizers across BC to implement card check, regardless of the panel's recommendation. We heard stories of pressure and misinformation during the voting period, designed to scare people away from unionizing. But what the panel recommended to government was a moderate path forward. I believe the changes to the process will be impactful and will no longer allow for conduct that undermines the integrity of secret ballot votes and undermines the right of people to unionize. This bill will shorten the window for the vote from 10 days to 5 days to bring it in line with other jurisdictions in Canada. It will also restrict what can be communicated during an organizing drive to clamp down on campaigns of misinformation. And it will give the board more latitude to offer remedial certification in cases where there was improper employer interference during the voter period. Together, I am hopeful that these provisions will provide real protections, enabling workers to exercise their right to choose whether to unionize in an environment free from interference. To quote the panel, "The secret ballot vote can only be an effective mechanism for employee choice if the code deters and prevents employers from engaging in unfair labor practices and provides meaningful consequences for such practices." So it will be critical that we monitor the effectiveness of these changes and ensure that they are having their intended effect. Another important change this bill makes is removing education as an essential service. This reverses a change implemented by the last government almost 20 years ago. British Columbia is the only Canadian jurisdiction to include education as an essential service, and this is unnecessary as the board already has the ability to deem a service essential if it endangers the health, safety, or welfare of BC residents. It's also not in keeping with the Supreme Court of Canada, which ruled in 2015 that the right to strike is constitutionally protected. The court limited the permissible scope of essential services to, quote, "clear and imminent threat to the life, personal safety, or health of the whole or part of the population." This change brings us in line with the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada and still allows for restrictions on strikes when education services are truly essential under the board's discretion. This might be the case, for example, with grade 12 exams. These changes and others are important and progressive changes that make the code fairer and more balanced. I also hope that since they are moderate in scope and recommended by an external panel, that they may have more endurance than past changes. That we have taken a step towards ending the pendulum swing between governments that has characterized labor policy in this province for far too long. So I'm happy to be supporting the bill before us today. Yet I must say that while this bill makes these important changes and more, I believe, as I said earlier, the conversation is missing some crucial considerations. We are still proceeding on the assumption that work looks much as it did 20 or 30 years ago, but this is simply not the case. We are seeing some alarming trends in the labor market, a growth in temporary and part-time precarious jobs. I'd like to cite a few statistics from the C.D. Howe Institute that they recently published. They found that over the last 20 years, Canada has seen 1.5 million more precarious workers. Temporary employment has grown at a faster rate than total employment, and the number of Canadians doing contract work has almost doubled. When people are forced to take temporary jobs, this creates a huge amount of uncertainty, inhibiting their income security and their ability to feel secure in planning for their future. This uncertainty, we know, is delaying people's decisions to start a family or to buy a home. The shift in the labor landscape requires the urgent attention of legislators. We need to ensure our laws are keeping up with these trends and that we are providing workers with the supports and protections they need as they navigate a rapidly transforming job market. The C.D. Howe Institute noted that trends in precarious employment are driven mainly by the need for flexibility in business affected by globalization, technology development, and economic circumstance. The panel that reviewed the code echoed this assessment. In their words, our economy today is defined by both globalization and a fissuring of the economy as capital has become more mobile and companies are using outsourcing and contracting to reduce costs and achieve more flexibility. The result, according to the panel, is, quote, a continuing erosion of middle-class jobs, increasing precarity and polarization between relatively low-paid, precarious work and highly paid skilled workers, and fewer middle-skilled jobs. This, Honourable Speaker, is not a sustainable situation. We know that employment is a critical social determinant of health, that those who earn higher, more stable incomes have better access to safe and secure housing, food, and medical care that provides for better health outcomes. Insecure work, on the other hand, leads to poorer physical and mental health and higher levels of stress. What is more, these trends are directly tied to increasing inequality that is taking hold, not only in BC, not only in Canada, but around the Western world. And there is nothing, Madam Speaker, more destabilizing to society and democracy than inequality. As journalist Paul Wilcox pointed out, the erosion of work quality, security, and incomes has been a big factor in increasing inequality in Canada, and somehow we've paid too little attention to the slowly unfolding crisis and the solutions that could be implemented. The Labour Code changes are a start, but what's really needed is a public demand that governments quit ignoring the steady, grinding decline in the quality of work available to Canadians. So we have a situation where, according to our traditional measure of GDP, our economy is doing well. Yet by other measures, by work quality, income security, inequality, we are coming up far short. This is why we need to go beyond GDP and start using a much more holistic measurement of how the economy is performing through developing a genuine progress indicator. To reiterate the point George Monbiot forcefully made recently, quote, since when was GDP a sensible measure of human welfare? A genuine progress indicator directly integrates the well-being of people and the environment implications of economic activity in measuring the health of the economy. Painting a true picture of the health of our economy through using a genuine progress indicator is one critical step to remedying our current situation. What we measure, we will value, and what we value, we will make policies towards increasing those outcomes. Another is the need for governments, all governments, including this one, to grapple with substantial and complex questions about government's role in the new economic landscape. How do we provide real income security for British Columbians trying to navigate a gig economy? How do we embrace innovation and innovative approaches to business while also ensuring we don't lose the hard-fought gains that workers have seen over the last century? How do we continue to be competitive and attract investment in a globalized world and ensure that companies want to stay and grow here, while also avoiding the race to the bottom economics, where people lose out while ever-increasing profits flow to fewer and fewer hands? How can we ensure our prosperity is truly sustainable and recognizes the ecological limits that we have spent way too long ignoring? I ask these questions not to suggest that there are any easy answers, but to say that governments like this one urgently need to be engaging with these questions and crafting forward-looking policies to address them. As the Labour Review panel pointed out, the traditional concepts of employment may no longer be applicable in the gig economy, with companies increasing reliance on contractors instead of employees. Implementing basic income to ensure that people have real security as they navigate the changing world of work is a critical part of the solution, and it is being embraced by economists around the world as an important step forward in the 21st century. But we must also consider how our employment laws are keeping up or are falling behind new modes of work. We also need to do more to foster innovation that aligns with our values, innovation that helps to build resilient communities, that supports clean prosperity, and that supports the health and well-being of British Columbians. And what we must also always keep at the forefront of our minds as we have these debates is, how can we best ensure that every British Columbian has the conditions to live a healthy, happy, fulfilling, and dignified life? We need to ensure that people are not just a factor of production working for the economy, but that the economy is working for people. We should strive to create the conditions where every British Columbian has a livable income, is free from the anxiety that income insecurity causes, where communities are strong and resilient, and people can look forward to the future with hope. And with that, Madam Speaker, I will reiterate my support for this bill and my belief that we need to start a much broader and urgent conversation today. Thank you.